Today, I want to talk about failure. There's been lots of really great research published recently about the importance of failure to us as human beings in order to grow. We're being told that we must stop avoiding failure and instead learn how to fail. Fail fast, fail forward. These are great buzz phrases, so we nod our heads and tell ourselves, we've got it. But the fact is, for most of you sitting in this room, you're used to getting things right. You're used to being rewarded when you get things right. And crucially, you're used to being punished when you fail, from school through to university, all the way to your working life. So when we talk about failure, it's abstract. At a deep gut level, we fight failure hard, especially now. Because these days, we have started punishing failure with something much worse than traditional punitive measures like prison time or fines. These days, we've started punishing failure with something that is far harder to come back from, with shame. And when shame is coupled with social media, the results are devastating. I know, I failed so publicly that it made global headlines. You've probably heard my story. I was the former editor of the Mail and Guardian, and then went on to be the editor-in-chief of the Huffington Post South Africa. It was during my time at HuffPost that it happened. A fake, racially provocative blog was submitted to my blog's editor by someone who claimed to be a woman and a feminist. The blog was critiquing white men, so it absolutely blew up. The author started coming under very heavy sexist cyberbullying. This was triggering for me, as I've similarly been exposed to that. So I jumped into the fray. I wrote a response calling for civil debate, making clear that I did not agree with everything the author had said, but agreeing that white men have historically held disproportionate power. As you can imagine, people were very angry. So when the blog turned out to be a fraud, it absolutely blew up. It turned out that it was a hoax by a white man designed to expose me and my newsroom. But the fact was that I had made a mistake. There were many things that I could and should have done better in that process. So I did a lot of introspection. I apologized deeply and from the heart. I looked at processes to fix the newsroom. I brought experts in to look at what we could do better. But it wasn't enough. It seems these days that no apology is. So here's what happened. Over the next few days, a small group of people ran a surprisingly powerful social media campaign demanding that I be fired. There were some influential people amongst this group, including journalists, and even the chief whip of our opposition party, John Steenhuisen, who somehow found time to tweet me 33 times in that first day, demanding that I resign. The pressure ratcheted up and up and up. It was the week from hell. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. I was under attack from every side, including my company. It's very hard to make a rational decision in that place. Within a few days of that blog being published, our press ombudsman delivered a ruling that can only be described as vicious. Other editors had made similar mistakes. None had been given such a harsh ruling or such a wrong interpretation of the South African Press Code. I would later go on to appeal the ruling and would win it, but at the time, it was the final nail in the coffin. I resigned a week after that blog was published. I would then go on to withdraw from public life largely and to go silent. And several months later, I was diagnosed with severe depression. Before the age of 35, I believed my life was over. I believed I had zero career prospects. I didn't know how I would pay my bills. Because here's the new thing about this intensified shame, this online shame that we're practicing as a culture. It's no longer about punitive measures that are meant to rehabilitate the offender so they can go on to do better. There's a crucial difference that cyberbullies employ these days when it comes to mistakes. It's no longer that you've made a mistake, because if you did, you could say sorry and you could move on. Instead, the message they drive home again and again is that you are a mistake and that nothing you do can change that. That's what I experience. The driving narrative behind many of the attacks that came my way was that I was never meant to be an editor. I found this really puzzling. I wondered if the subtext was that someone who looks like me was never meant to be an editor. It seemed that all my successes, all my sacrifices, all my learnings, all my hard work meant nothing, that I was a fraud. You know, I've always had a very strong sense of purpose in my life. I've never typically suffered from imposter syndrome, but it seemed that others were determined that I should. So this is the difference then between guilt and shame. Guilt is part of the human condition, and with guilt comes repentance. You can be absolved, you can say sorry, you can make amends. With shame, you are a mistake, and there's no coming back from that. This is the message I constantly receive from people for months and even a year after the incident. People that I did not know and who would obviously never say these things to my face, because that's not how cyberbullying works. Shame was a potent weapon in ancient times, but back then you had to actually pick up that rock yourself and fling it at the person in question, usually a woman. You had to debase yourself in that cruel action and be seen to do it. It's much easier when you can hide behind a keyboard and not look into that person's eyes. In Monica Lewinsky's talk on public shame, she took a hard look at this new culture of public humiliation and asked for a better way. I want to take up that call, not because I got hurt, but because I believe that shame is costing us enormously as a society. And not just with the people who are being shamed in that they lose their livelihoods or sometimes even their lives. Neither is it just for those who are doing the shaming in that it dehumanizes them. I want to do this because I believe that shame is costing us enormously in that leaders who could be making our country a much better place, who are very influential, who hold high positions, can no longer look at their mistakes and learn from it. They can no longer do a better job of leading us. And South Africa and this continent and the world desperately needs better leaders. But we won't let them learn. We've made it a blood sport to destroy them when they slip up. Another cost of shame is that I personally didn't really feel ashamed. I felt a lot of things. I felt anger, depression, I felt fear, but the most concerning thing I felt came after all those emotions and almost threatened to swallow me whole, and that was a consuming sense of numbness. Where before I had a fire to change the world in my belly, to leave it a better place, to give my life to a cause I believed in, and to work hard to help fix things and make people's lives better, and to put my hand up for big and scary opportunities, there was suddenly the urge to put my hand down, to keep my head below the parapets to avoid it getting blown off. There was suddenly the urge to live a small, safe life and not take those risks. I wonder how many other leaders who have similarly tasted this kind of trauma feel this way. Leaders who could be doing great things and helping change our world are too traumatized to try again for fear of being attacked again. And worst of all, I wonder how many of you, never having tasted public shame, have made the same decision, have seen this new scary world we live in where someone can overnight lose their job and become a notorious figure, and you have made a decision in favor of self-preservation. Because I know there were many people who looked at what I went through and didn't experience some kind of schadenfreude, but felt genuine empathy, that oof that you feel when somebody falls really badly. And seeing that, seeing me and others get hurt, you determined too not to say yes to big, scary opportunities. You determined too not to put your hand up when you see what leaders go through in this new digitized world where people are so angry and so unforgiving. You too are choosing to live a small life. What's that costing us as a society? What's that robbing us of? Is that why we have so few women leaders putting up their hands for top management positions? I want to read you a quote. "I am human too. I do make mistakes. I deeply regret these lapses and beg your forgiveness." Those were the words of South African former Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene. He had made a lapse of judgment and not been entirely honest about having met with the controversial Gupta family. He didn't do any dealings with them, didn't accept any bribes, but he didn't admit that he had met them. What I read was his apology, but we couldn't accept it as a society, so he had to resign. This was a man who was a public servant of great integrity and talent, one who had stood up to major corruption and lost his job previously for it, one who had spent his entire professional life training for this important role. But we couldn't forgive him this one lapse of judgment, and we lost a leader in a time when we desperately need leaders of integrity. Here's what the mob that erupts after an incident doesn't understand. None of us are perfect. None of us get it. We're all on a journey. We all might say and do problematic things. I've had to learn that too for myself, and I regret some of my previous writings that did not have enough grace for people going on a journey. In his book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed, author John Ronson goes around talking to victims of public shaming, people who made stupid comments on social media and lost their livelihoods. People like Lindsay Stone, who made a rude gesture at an American war memorial, or people like Justine Seko, who tried to parody racism and tweeted that she was going to Africa and she hoped that she wouldn't get AIDS, but probably wouldn't because she's white, just before she got on a flight to this country. Both Justine and Lindsay lost their livelihoods and were hounded into obscurity. I imagine the people that attacked Lindsay and Justine held deeply held beliefs about racism, about war vets, and they felt they were doing a good thing by taking on these two and essentially trying to destroy them. I imagine those who came for me also felt they were doing a good thing, that they cared deeply about the state of journalism in our country and our world, that they cared about the scourge of fake news. But another author who writes about online shaming, Sue Sheff, notes that when activism is confused or turned into digital warfare, the message gets lost and all people remember is the noise. Change can't and won't happen in this way. Yet humiliation tactics continue to be used and confused for activism. This despite numerous psychological studies showing that when it comes to people who are battling with problems like weight, psychological problems, addiction, in controlled studies where they were shamed, they didn't get better. What happened was that they actually relapsed or got worse. So what's the solution? Researcher Brené Brown says that the antidote to shame is vulnerability. But in the aftermath of my incident, I tried to be vulnerable. I was very vulnerable in my apology, and I got mocked for it. And I think that was probably what hurt me the most. I spoke about how I deeply believed in racial reconciliation as the only hope for our country. I spoke about the need for healing, for understanding and empathy, and people I knew mocked me. So I don't know if vulnerability is a thing that we need immediately after an incident like that. The mob isn't quite ready to hear it. I believe we need to go one step further as a society. We need to expect people to fail and clearly outline how we deal with it when they do so. I dream about a country and a world where every organization and institution has a policy on what happens to an employee or a student or a child when they make a mistake. When they say something stupid, even if it is about race or sex or gender or sexuality. A policy that the organization can stick to, even when the outrage brigade has lost its individual humanity and its collective rage. A policy that incorporates aspects of correction as well as rehabilitation, and that applies it consistently, not just based on what's being shouted most loudly by the people with the biggest mic. because that's just not fair. And besides not being fair, it's also, as I've said, robbed us of so much. A leader cannot look at a mistake and grow from it because of the overwhelming shame response. I couldn't look at what happened for so long because I didn't want to think about it. That's not how learning happens. That's not how we grow as a society. And I have learned my lesson. I'm working on new models to create in-depth and thoroughly researched journalism. I've learned that cheap clicks come at great cost, because that's how some of the best lessons are learned, by making mistakes at first. So let's allow each other to make mistakes. Let's learn to have grace, not just because it's the fair or the right thing to do, but because every Saul has the potential to be a Paul. Every sinner has the potential to be the most effective and loudest evangelist. When we shame sexists and racists and the like and drive them into silence, we lose the massive potential to transform those underlying ills in our society by creating a change agent from within. You don't fix things like racism and sexism by preaching to the converted. So let's not lose that opportunity. Let's do better.